During the Season 1 finale of Fallout, we were given a teaser of the setting for Season 2, New Vegas, which is located in the Mojave Wasteland. Thanks to the game Fallout New Vegas, there is a ton that we know about this region. The main conflict, major factions vying for control, important characters, and points of interest. How it all relates to what we might see in Season 2 of Fallout will be explained in this video, and as usual, useful timestamps can be found in the video description. It's important to know that the events of Fallout New Vegas take place in the year 2281, whereas the Fallout TV series takes place more than 15 years later in 2297. In the game, we play as the courier who was hired by the Mojave Express to deliver a package from California to New Vegas. Before reaching his destination, the courier was ambushed by a man named Benny, along with some hired thugs. Benny stole the package from the courier before shooting him in the head and ditching his body in a shallow grave. By some miracle, the courier survived this grievous injury and was both rescued and treated by Doc Mitchell in the nearby town of Goodsprings. The courier then set off into the Mojave Wasteland to find his attempted murderer and discover the importance of the package he was assigned to deliver. As it turns out, the package contained the Platinum Chip, a prototypical high-density data storage device that was developed by Robert House, the original founder of Robco Industries. This is the company that pioneered much of the iconic robots and technology seen in the Fallout universe, including the Pip-Boy. As a quick aside, Robert House made an appearance in the final Season 1 episode of Fallout. He was one of the representatives at the clandestine Vault-Tec meeting where they discussed how to orchestrate the end of the world. As for the game, Robert House, known as Mr. House in the Mojave, is the mysterious ruler of New Vegas. Aware of the impending war, Mr. House utilized his wealth to acquire the Lucky 38 Hotel and Casino and converted it into his own personal bunker in the years leading up to the Great War. In addition, Mr. House built a life support pod in the basement of the Lucky 38, which would extend his life indefinitely. It was all powered by a nuclear reactor, which could supply electricity to the Lucky 38 for centuries. Just surviving was not enough for Mr. House though. He wanted to thrive in the impending post-apocalypse. To do that, he had his brain wired to a supercomputer housed within the Lucky 38. This supercomputer formed a communication network with several other mainframes equipped with telemetric data collecting devices, which were constructed in strategic locations throughout the Mojave. This network allowed Mr. House to monitor Vegas and its surrounding regions, but doing so would be pointless if those regions were destroyed by atomic bombs. And so Mr. House prepared for that too. One of the primary functions of his network was to predict incoming warheads and remotely disarm them before detonation. As a last resort, he had laser cannons mounted on the roof of the Lucky 38 to destroy any warheads that remained armed. Las Vegas, being spared nuclear bombardment, would emerge as an oasis in the apocalyptic Midwest. That is where the final phase of Mr. House's plan would come into play. He would release his Securitrons from beneath the Lucky 38 casino and a bunker east of Vegas. This personal army would establish and maintain law and order once the dust settled. The crux of Mr. House's plan was the Platinum Chip, which is, in essence, the first microchip ever made in the Fallout universe. It contained software upgrades that were vital for the optimal function of both his missile defense grid and the Securitrons. By some twist of fate, the Platinum Chip was printed in California on October 22, 2077, just one day before the Great War. And, as Mr. House said,
"It was to have been delivered by courier the following afternoon, but by then, the world had ended."
Without the Platinum Chip, Mr. House was caught off guard on the day of the Great War. A total of 77 atomic warheads targeted Las Vegas and its surrounding areas. His missile defense grid was only able to remotely disarm 59 of the warheads, with the Lucky 38's roof-mounted laser cannons destroying another 9. This left 9 atomic warheads that did reach their targets, though none hit the city itself. While not the perfect defense that Mr. House had initially planned for, there is still a relative paucity of craters and radioactive fallout thanks to his efforts. Though there are still sparse remnants of the nuclear attacks across the Mojave, in Black Mountain, Cottonwood, and the outskirts of Nellis, to name a few. The effort also nearly killed Mr. House.
Software glitches set off a cascade of system crashes. I had to take the Lucky 38's reactor offline, lest it melt down. For nearly 5 years, I battled power outages and more system crashes until I finally managed to reboot my data core with an older version of the OS. I spent the next few decades in a veritable coma, but I survived, obviously, and eventually thrived.
Emerging from his coma, Mr. House found a new world order. For the most part, humans formed scattered tribes with very little organization. House kept a low profile and waited for the right opportunity to make his play, which presented itself around the year 2271, with the arrival of New California Republic, or NCR forces in the Mojave. It's at this point that we should discuss the major powers at play in the Mojave Wasteland and their histories. While the NCR was apparently small-scale in Season 1 of Fallout, they were one of the earliest and largest governmental institutions to emerge in the apocalyptic wasteland, being officially founded in the year 2189. Represented by a two-headed bear, out of all the governing bodies in the Fallout universe, the NCR is the most akin to our modern US government. As for the destruction of Shady Sands, which is estimated to have occurred around the year 2282, shortly after the events of Fallout New Vegas, I don't believe it entirely explains the downfall of the NCR. The population of Shady Sands was around 35,000 at the time of its destruction. Meanwhile, the NCR included more than 700,000 citizens in total. While it was certainly a devastating blow, it alone doesn't explain the pitiful state of the NCR in the show, at least not for me. Regardless of the exact circumstances leading to the NCR's ruination, in the decade prior, when they were first observed by Mr. House, they were undoubtedly stronger. At that time, NCR troops were organized, wore matching uniforms, and carried standard-issue service rifles. Their expansion east into the Mojave presented a real threat to Mr. House's plans for New Vegas. While his Securitrons were more than capable of dispatching the occasional band of raiders, even without the upgrades from the Platinum chip, they would not be enough to oppose the full might of the NCR. So, like all good businessmen, Mr. House sought to negotiate with the NCR instead. He knew that some show of strength would be needed to be taken seriously, so he recruited allies. The Omertas of the Gomorrah, Chairman of the Tops, and White Glove Society of the Ultralux. These former tribes became the Three Families of New Vegas, an organized coalition under Mr. House's employ that could fight to keep New Vegas independent of NCR control. Still, even that wouldn't be enough to stay an NCR invasion of the Strip. Mr. House knew this, but he also knew of another major power and conflict at play in the Mojave, revolving around Caesar's Legion. While the NCR originated in the far west, Caesar's Legion emerged as a power east of the Colorado River, in what was Arizona before the Great War. It was also nearly 60 years after the NCR, being founded in 2247 by a former member of the Followers of the Apocalypse, Edward Caesar Sallow, and his right-hand man, Joshua Graham. Represented by a bull and ruled by one man, Caesar, the Legion is loosely modeled after the military of the Roman Empire. Their modus operandi is to use military strength to conquer and enslave the scattered tribal societies of the post-war world as part of their expanding empire. While violent and brutal, the Legion's tactics were effective. In just a few decades, Caesar's Legion was able to gain control over the majority of land in the former states of Arizona and New Mexico, as well as footholds in both Utah and Colorado. The only group to mount a major resistance during this time were known as the Desert Rangers, who clashed with Caesar's Legion in former Arizona. They had superior training and equipment, but were overwhelmed by the Legion's numbers. By late 2271, the Desert Rangers found their ranks decimated and they were pushed out of Arizona. They sought aid from the NCR in the Mojave, signing the Ranger Unification Treaty. This treaty effectively absorbed the Rangers into the NCR and pitted the NCR against Caesar's Legion. Following this, both the NCR and Caesar's Legion were aware of each other's presence in the Mojave Wasteland. The NCR wanted to secure control of the Hoover Dam for two main purposes. The first was to restore its hydroelectric generators, which would provide ample electricity and power for the NCR and its allied settlements throughout the Mojave. The second was to serve as a defensible bulwark or choke point against further expansion of Caesar's Legion into western NCR-controlled territory. On the other hand, Caesar saw the Hoover Dam as a pivotal stepping stone on the path to conquering the entirety of the NCR, so that its more civil and trade-focused societal foundations could be integrated with the military might of the Legion into a singular and unified totalitarian empire. Feasibility aside, Caesar's ambitions ensured that the Legion would be the single largest threat to the NCR's continued existence. So it was that in 2274, a sizable NCR force arrived at the Hoover Dam. They found a small army of Securitrons and the three families of New Vegas waiting to greet them. Thanks to the ever-growing threat of Caesar's Legion, along with a sizable force of his own, Mr. House was able to talk the NCR into signing the Treaty of New Vegas. The terms of the treaty allowed the NCR to peacefully establish bases at the Hoover Dam and McCarran Airport. In return, once the NCR restored function to the Hoover Dam, they would provide 5% of its electrical output to the New Vegas Strip. In addition, Mr. House was given full sovereignty over New Vegas. This mutual agreement also had the effect of bringing furloughed NCR troops to the Strip for some R&R. Proving his reputation as a savvy businessman, Mr. House turned his greatest potential enemy into his best-paying customer, at least for the time being. House knew that the NCR's friendly facade would come down as soon as Caesar's Legion ceased being a threat, so he began preparing for that contingency as well. Amassing wealth once more, this time in the form of bottle caps, Mr. House began funding search efforts in Sunnyvale, California to locate the long-lost platinum chip. It would be years before the platinum chip was finally found, but in the meantime, conflict in the Mojave Wasteland would continue. That brings us to the Brotherhood of Steel. The Mojave chapter of the Brotherhood was formed as the result of internal strife. Elijah, a Brotherhood elder in New California, pushed for the development of new and questionable technology. His ideas were deemed radical and dangerous, and so the other elders sent him east with his most loyal followers to form the Mojave chapter of the Brotherhood with the official goal of securing the Hoover Dam. The chapter initially settled in Hidden Valley, an old and secret military installation with a bunker of similar design to the Vault-Tec vaults, but without the blue jumpsuits and morally dubious human experiments. While the Mojave chapter's initial purpose was to secure Hoover Dam, their elder Elijah was distracted upon discovering HELIOS 1, a solar power plant of technological marvel. Located in the Mojave, HELIOS 1 held the potential to convert massive amounts of solar energy into usable electricity. It was also the site of two secret US Army projects, Archimedes and Archimedes II. The former was a stationary laser defense system, and the latter was a satellite platform and a mobile targeting system for orbital laser bombardment. Seeing this potential, the radical elder Elijah ordered the Mojave chapter to abandon their mission for the Hoover Dam and to set up a new base of operations in HELIOS 1. While their efforts to restore functionality of HELIOS 1 faced constant frustration, the Mojave chapter of the Brotherhood was able to operate in the Vegas area for several years with relative freedom. That changed after the NCR and Mr. House signed the Treaty of New Vegas in 2274. The NCR viewed Helios 1 as a potential backup source of electricity for if the Hoover Dam became irreparably damaged or captured by Caesar's Legion. Though it was still inoperable, Elder Elijah refused to abandon the facility. Over the next 2 years, the Mojave chapter engaged the NCR in guerrilla-style fighting. Although the Brotherhood had superior weapons, armor, and training, they lacked numbers and the ability to call for reinforcements. By the year 2276, attrition had taken its toll on the Brotherhood, and they were overwhelmed by an all-out assault from the NCR, termed Operation Sunburst. NCR forces outnumbered those of the Brotherhood 20-1. By the time the dust settled, half of the Mojave chapter was wiped out. Those that remained armed security systems in the facility that would deny the NCR access to the primary control tower of Helios 1, then fled back to Hidden Valley. Meanwhile, Elder Elijah vanished during the fight, leaving head paladin McNamara to take his place as the new elder of the Mojave chapter. Elder McNamara was deeply affected by the battle at Helios 1. Wanting to preserve the Mojave chapter above all else, he enacted a strict lockdown at Hidden Valley Bunker. With excursions to the outside world being limited to the bare necessities, the Brotherhood became little more than a ghost in the Mojave Wasteland. Just a year later, in 2277, the NCR found themselves in another battle with Caesar's Legion. In the first battle of Hoover Dam, Joshua Graham, then legate of the Legion, led a direct attack on NCR forces. Graham's forces pushed NCR troops back to Boulder City. However, when the Legion gave chase, they found that it was all a clever trap. The detonation of hidden explosives killed the majority of Graham's high-ranking legionaries. Without leadership, the remaining lower-ranking legionaries at the dam were quickly routed by entrenched NCR troops. This led to Graham ordering a full retreat of his remaining troops back east of the Hoover Dam. Caesar had to make an example of Joshua Graham to show that failure would not be tolerated. Graham was covered in pitch, set ablaze, and cast into the Grand Canyon. A new legate by the name of Linnaeus took Graham's place. Although believed dead, Graham survived his injuries. Years later, he would resurface as legends of the Burned Man, covered from head to toe in bandages, reached the Mojave. The NCR might have pursued Caesar's retreating army back east after the battle. However, they were also severely weakened due to a catastrophe of apocalyptic proportions that occurred only months prior. Thanks to previous efforts of the Courier, there was a burgeoning community known as the Divide that served as a bridge between the New California Republic and Mojave Wasteland. It allowed the NCR to easily move troops and supplies to the Mojave, which were vital in combating Legion expansion. Unfortunately, the Courier who helped build the Divide also destroyed it when he delivered a single package from Navarro. The package was decorated with old world symbols that matched those on the missile silos within the Divide. Shortly after the Courier left the package with the residents of the Divide, it was opened. This caused the device therein to be activated without warning, and in doing so, remotely set off a cascade of detonations of the many subterranean warheads within the Divide's long-abandoned silos. What was once a symbolic name of the Divide gained new meaning, as the force of the explosions cracked and split the earth open. Blistering radioactive sandstorms and hostile mutants aside, the shattered terrain ensured that the NCR would never use the Divide as a supply line again. The only remaining connection between NCR territory and the Mojave was the Long 15, which was a much longer and more congested route. It was this devastation that hamstrung the NCR forces in the Mojave Wasteland, allowing Caesar's Legion to regroup near the southeast border of former Nevada, where they would spend several years preparing for a second attack on Hoover Dam. All of this played in Mr. House's favor, who found his alliance with the NCR strengthened by the First Battle of Hoover Dam. He spent the next 4 years funding a tireless pursuit of the Platinum Chip. In the year 2281, the Platinum Chip was finally recovered. House contracted the Mojave Express to have the chip delivered from NCR territory to New Vegas. Despite devising a clever scheme for the chip's covert delivery, Benny, head of the Chairman family, intercepted the courier and stole the Platinum Chip. As you may recall from earlier in the video, that is where the events of the game pick up, and it's where the player can begin to influence the course of history. The only outcome that is guaranteed is that there is a second battle of Hoover Dam, and one major power ends up taking control of it. Depending on player choice, it can be Mr. House, the NCR, the Legion, or the courier himself. And it's worth mentioning that no particular series of events in the game has ever been confirmed as canon by Obsidian, the game's developers, or Bethesda, the current owners of the Fallout IP. So, all we can do at this point is a look at the state of New Vegas in the teaser from the final episode of Fallout Season 1 and speculate on which series of events in Fallout New Vegas might have led to it. The glimpse we are given is one of conflict and desolation. Thanks to a road sign, we know this is near the Tops Hotel and Casino, home of the Chairman family. Continuing along, we see the bones of a Deathclaw and multiple humans. This tells us that at least one Deathclaw was able to infiltrate the Strip. Perhaps the protective outer walls were destroyed during the battle. Also, given that the remains are just bones, it seems that the battle did not just occur. It's probably been at least a few months since it took place. Beyond that though, well, bones stick around for a long time in arid conditions, like those found in a desert. So it could have been many years, perhaps breaking out immediately after the major events of the game. Next, we see a crashed vertibird with NCR decals. This all but confirms that the NCR was involved in the fighting. Moving further back, we can see the top sign on the left as well as the L from the Lucky 38 sign on the right. We can actually match this up to the game to determine that this is the south side of the Strip and that we are moving in the southern direction. Further down the road, we see a defensive wall that was breached, along with the husks of several destroyed Securitrons and anti-tank spikes. So we know the Securitrons were definitely involved in the fighting. Finally, the Welcome to New Vegas sign comes into view. This is also in the game, and the wall behind it, which is broken in the teaser, is still intact in the game. It should be noted that Camp McCarran, where much of the NCR's military personnel was stationed, is just a short distance south of this wall. All of this suggests a battle between NCR troops and the Securitrons, which might have been controlled by either Mr. House or the courier. In order for Mr. House to still have been in control of the Securitrons, he would need to be alive. The only way for that to happen is for the player, that is to say the courier, to side with Mr. House. If any other path was taken, Mr. House would have been killed off. I'm going to argue that this is the most likely series of events that the show will adhere to. My reasoning is that Mr. House has already been established as a significant character in the TV show, and I believe that was done with the intent of him being more heavily involved in Season 2. In fact, Mr. House could be the primary reason why Lucy's father, Hank McLean, went to New Vegas. They were business associates after all. Now, given that Mr. House survives, there are several other facts we can be sure of. First, the Brotherhood of Steel, or at least the Mojave chapter, would have been wiped out by the courier. There is no way to side with Mr. House in the game without destroying the Mojave chapter, or at the very least, their bunker in Hidden Valley. This sort of works to the show's advantage, as losing contact with the Mojave chapter could serve as motivation for Maximus and a contingent of his West Coast chapter to venture out into the Mojave in search of answers. As for the fate of the NCR and Caesar's Legion, it's a bit of a toss-up. While it is possible that the leaders on both sides, President Kimball and Caesar, could have perished in the events leading up to the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, it is not required, and Mr. House actually prefers it if they stay alive. However, what we do know is that following Mr. House's victory, both the NCR and Caesar's Legion are weakened and effectively pushed out of former Nevada. It's also known that Caesar has a life-threatening brain tumor and that he would likely die without the aid of the courier. Whether that is actually the case is just speculation, but it could lead to the eventual fall of Caesar's Legion, given how important Caesar is. The NCR, on the other hand, is much more resilient. It's feasible that at some point over the following 15 years, the NCR would muster up enough military strength and eventually launch an attack on New Vegas. Such an attack could very well lead to the war-torn version of the Strip that we see at the end of Season 1. It's also possible that the NCR overextended their reach with said attack, contributing to their apparent downfall back on the West Coast. In this next section, let's discuss some of the other factions in the Mojave Wasteland that we might expect to make an appearance in Season 2. We should quickly cover the Enclave. This shadow organization was founded by a subset of scheming individuals from the highest ranks of the pre-war American government and socio-economic elites. It was within an Enclave facility that Dr. Wilzig successfully produced cold fusion and subsequently escaped at the start of Season 1. In Fallout New Vegas, there are remnants of the Enclave, though they've largely abandoned the organization and its ideals. Even if they survived past the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, it's likely that they died in the years following due to old age. Next are the Followers of the Apocalypse. This humanitarian organization is comprised of some of the Wasteland's brightest and most compassionate minds. They, along with the Kings, a chivalrous and respected gang of Elvis impersonators, provided a modicum of stability to Freeside, the ghetto outskirts of New Vegas. It's possible that both of these factions continued to operate in Freeside following the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, although how they fared in the apparent Battle of New Vegas is anyone's guess. Next, we have the Boomers. This isolationist and relatively civil tribe occupies the Nellis Air Force Base, northeast of New Vegas. The Boomers were founded by a contingent of Vault 34 dwellers that left the vault by force in order to escape overpopulation. Given that the experiment in Vault 34 was to overstock the armory with firearms and ammunition, the Boomers had a proclivity for guns and heavy ordnance. In other words, they would definitely agree with the saying, an armed society is a polite society. Also, because of their roots as vault dwellers, they did their best to keep outsiders away from Nellis Air Force Base, outfitting it with several howitzers, which are large artillery guns. However, due in part to the actions of the courier, the Boomers toned down their isolationist rhetoric and began trading with travelers in the Mojave. That being said, they still retained the howitzers at Nellis Air Force Base as a defensive measure against any potential attacks. In addition, and thanks to the courier, they also possess a flight-worthy B-29 bomber, which was successfully deployed in the Second Battle of Hoover Dam. Finally, let's talk about Jacobstown. This settlement, located at a resort in Mount Charleston, consists almost entirely of super mutants and a variant thereof, the Nightkin. We have yet to see either in the Fallout show, so hopefully that changes with Season 2. While super mutants tend to act violently towards humans, those at Jacobstown are much more tolerant. They are led by a first-generation, smarter super mutant named Marcus. He has a history spanning many years in the Fallout games, first appearing in Fallout 2 around the year 2241. However, he has been around for at least 200 years or more by the time we get to Fallout New Vegas. Overall, I would say Jacobstown is the perfect location for the Fallout show to introduce super mutants and the story behind their creation. In this next section, let's talk about specific characters from Fallout New Vegas that might make appearances in Season 2 of the show. We just spoke about Marcus, and of course at the top of the list there's Mr. House. We've already discussed him at length, but it would be great to see the juxtaposition between his pre-war and post-war self. Next, Joshua Graham, also known as the Burned Man. We've discussed him earlier as well, but I would personally just like to see his bandage-wrapped design fully realized in live action. In addition, he is a living legend that could easily rival the badassery of the Ghoul, aka Cooper Howard, from the show. He contrasts with Cooper well, in that he has actually managed to hold on to his ideals despite his traumatic past. Then we have Veronica. She is one of the only Mojave Chapter Brotherhood members that is confirmed to survive their destruction. She has a complicated history with the Brotherhood, and one that would allow her to relate to Lucy's own conflicted feelings regarding her upbringing. Rose of Sharon Cassidy, known more simply as Cass, is a shotgun-toting, whiskey-guzzling caravaneer with a proclivity towards fighting. Her worldview is not unlike that of Cooper's, and I think they would have a great dynamic if they stumbled into each other. There's also Boone, a former NCR sharpshooter with an axe to grind, and Rex, a type of cyberhound used by law enforcement before the Great War. I'm not sure how large a role either of these characters would or could play, but it would be nice if the screenwriters at least gave them a nod. I want to give a note here about another important character that made an appearance in the Vault-Tec board meeting near the end of Season 1, Frederick Sinclair. He was the man behind the construction of both the Sierra Madre and Big MT Research Center. Both of these areas are featured in each of their own respective DLC or expansions in Fallout New Vegas. Dead Money featured the Sierra Madre Hotel and Casino, and Old World Blues featured the Big MT. If they aren't covered in Season 2, then perhaps Lucy and the gang will get around to them in Season 3. Finally, let's talk briefly about the vaults that can be found in and around New Vegas. There are 6 in total, and none of them are as nice or successful as Lucy's Vault, Vault 33, or Vault 4. However, I do think stumbling upon 1 or 2 of these vaults could further open Lucy's eyes to the diabolical nature of Vault-Tec. But perhaps that is a topic better saved for another video. Overall, I think Fallout New Vegas is a fantastic game, and it's one of my all-time favorites. If you don't mind dated visuals and somewhat clunky mechanics, then I highly suggest spending a few dollars to play it yourself. If you think I missed or got something wrong, feel free to discuss in the comments, I'll be there as well. If you want to see more great content, you can head over to my channel, and if you're new, consider subscribing. You're helping me feed my cat, her name's Marshmallow. Have a great day. If you're here today, have a great Friday and a great weekend. And as always, thanks for watching.